Hello, my man. How are you?
Hello,
Dan,
thank
I
you.
hear
How
you.
are you?
Oh, I'm
I hear
good,
you
mate.
both.
Oh, perfect. We're good. Comms are good. Let's fire away.
All
Yeah, good.
right.
How are you, Steven?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us today. So, can we start?
Absolutely. I guess I should say I, mateys. Perhaps I
All
should get
right.
into the flow. I
Yes.
was trying to find a pirate's hat, but I couldn't find one, so that's as close as I'm going to get to the.
Not important.
I love that, sir. I love that. We're getting in the
Perfect.
piratery theme.
There you
Crusaders.
go.
Good,
You
good,
got to
good.
go with the theme, right?
Yeah. A little intro, please. Steven, please intro about you, about what are you doing, your professional pathways.
Absolutely, absolutely. First of all, thank you for having me. This is quite the pleasure. When I heard about your endeavor, I was absolutely um, happy and amazed to be on it, and I'm so glad that we connected. So a little bit about me. So I'm Stephen Wallace. My background, my undergraduate was in chemical engineering. Shortly after getting my chemical engineering degree, I got into industry. I was a production engineer for a while, and then I very soon got into process safety management or chemical safety. And I did consulting at several places around the United States. And after that, I went back into industry and I was the process safety manager for a
Yeah.
couple of plants. And then I also was uh, I also got into managing the safety departments at a couple of plants. And
Great.
then a few years later, I came to the United States government and I was in the government. I first started out in an organization
Oh,
many of your
government.
listeners may have heard of called the U.S. Chemical Safety Board. They
Wow.
do investigations at chemical plants and refineries throughout the United States, and I was a part of that organization for several years. I went to a
Mhm.
couple of other agencies in the federal government, but one that I did sort of at the more recently was called the National Nuclear Security Administration.
Mhm.
We managed the nuclear stockpile, so I was a senior advisor helping to manage safety at the nuclear stockpile.
Wow.
So I still do some consulting, but I've also tried my hand a little bit at writing. So a shameless plug, I guess, is my novel came out about a year ago, and it's called
Perfect.
Hazardous Lies. And actually, it is a novel based on an accident in a chemical plant. I took a lot of my life experience, fictionalized it, and that's what I'm working on now. I actually have a second novel coming out in a couple of months. So that's a little about me. I'll be glad to answer any
Great.
other questions you have.
Great background. I see you did almost the perfect pathway through your professional careers. So I think now you're working on your second book. Am I right?
That's correct. Yes.
Uh-huh. Can you give a little insight about it?
Oh, yes, I'll be glad to. It's a very different one than my first book, which this is a thriller
Hmm.
about, as I said, an accident in a chemical plant. I'm currently working on the sequel to that. But my second book is a very different one. It is a satirical look at a bureaucrat in the government who is struggling with a lot of efficiency initiatives that are coming down. And the title of it's coming out in April. The title of it's called
Oh.
Average Civil Employee, a novel of bureaucratic absurdities. And it was a fun one to write.
Oh, then can agree and approve it. So yeah, the middle range employees are definitely burdened on the bureaucracy. I think it's not the only problem in UK and Azerbaijan and also in the United States. As if you're talking
Yes.
about it, if you're doing your second book through this problem, we can say so. It's not only the issue, not only issue in the several countries, because it seems like it's a global something that global must be handled.
Yes. And I think it's becoming more common and people are appreciating the value in our field of storytelling. And I kind of looked at it that a novel is almost the ultimate in storytelling. You're unfolding something. Certainly it's not like a soundbite like some things, but I think it's very valuable to put things in terms of stories, even actual events. You put them in stories with narratives and such, and it's a good learning experience. So that's kind of how I pivoted to that.
Yeah, totally right. Totally right. We're gonna learn from case to case, and if we handle and deal with something, we are totally happy. Okay, let's go through our questions. Dan, do you have anything to add, or let's give you a moment to shine?
A moment to shine. Yeah, thanks. Well, no, do you know what? Do you know what, Stephen? Absolutely incredible background, and you're exactly right. You know, in the UK at the moment, there's a massive theme around storytelling. You know, and I have yet to I wouldn't say master, but yet to dip my toe in the water within that arena. But these professionals that are out at the moment and actually going to organisations and telling stories and having that personal attachment because they've seen the aftermath. You know, they've seen the loss, they're grieving for loved ones and stuff. And these are having massive impacts across the UK.
Yep.
But I guess if I may, I just on a question in terms of, I always wonder what sort of impact that has from a safety point of view, in maybe in the context of reducing sort of incidents and accidents in the workplace, and how do we measure it? I guess that's my question. How do we measure that talk has been a success?
That's a very good question. And I think one of the inherent issues that we've always had with health, safety, and environment field is how do you measure things that didn't happen? How, so a lot of times there's two ways to evaluate something. I mean, you can evaluate the process that you use, and then you can evaluate the outcomes that you get. And it's important to look at both of those. So we're hoping that facilities don't have very serious accidents often. And so we hope that our outcome is very rare. However, when you lower the bar and you look at things like near miss accidents, not just accidents themselves that result in significant and serious consequences, but things that if something had gone a little differently, that could have resulted in a problem. I wrote an article for uh, a professional journal called Professional Safety from the American Society of Safety Professionals at near misses or near hits, as some people call them. And one of the things that I felt about looking at that is that if you are either one condition or one action away from a catastrophe, that is a learning experience and it's a warning, and you need to use it as such. So to get to your question, how do you measure it? Is how much can we tease out in these stories about how someone made a decision because of the information that they had, but their situational awareness was not exactly what it should have been, maybe through no fault of their own. I mean, some of the things that I saw when I was with the Chemical Safety Board, that's one of the recurring themes is situational awareness. People did not know exactly how the process was. And they had maybe often ran that same operation, done that same activity, but for whatever reason, over time, we had these small changes, and small changes can result in what we call normalization of deviations. So you have a safety margin, then you make a small change, then you make a small change, then you make another one, you learn to live with those small changes, and then all of a sudden your safety margin is gone. And so you may have done this particular activity many times, but that one last time you didn't have that safety margin left. So that's a way that I like to talk about it, which is at the end of telling one of these stories, what are you going to go look at? Like, for instance, in my novel, I talk about a very realistic scenario, which is material of construction incompatible with that particular operation. So there was one failure that if that one system was overridden, you could have a catastrophe. And so it's important to say, okay, after that, or have you looked at the materials of construction that are in your process to ensure that we're not one situation or perhaps two or three failures away from having a catastrophe? So Dan, that's what I like to kind of do and how I like to frame storytelling and how it can be used to prevent accidents, because it helps us to look at the front end to say before an accident, because it's always best to prevent one rather than respond to one, as you know. So that's what I like to do.
Understood.
Great.
Great
Yeah.
perspective. So let's go through another questions. And back to 1984 when the Chernobyl nuclear disaster happened, and if you all know that the management and politics of the USSR tried to bury the truth. So how much of that still happening in 2026 and 2025? They gone down the past year, and what can frontline health and safety professional do to push it back? What can they do?
Yeah, and it's interesting. I guess I have a perspective from coming not only from the chemical industry, but when I was at the Chemical Safety Board, obviously I would deploy to facilities that had serious accidents.
Mhm.
And so I'm seeing companies where there's been a serious major breakdown. And I guess I would frame your question a couple of ways. I think that there are some times when, from a reputational standpoint, a company doesn't necessarily want to be as forthcoming, perhaps with the public, um, because they don't want to expose all of the problems that they had
Because
that
of
led up to
reputation,
it.
like.
Right. It's almost like they want to sort of assume that something is, can we see this as either an anomaly or it was just one poor action by an operator that caused this problem?
Yep.
I was always most concerned when I saw companies that were not honest with themselves. That's the most important thing. Even if they're putting a spin for public digestion, I want to make sure that companies are honest with themselves. When they would find a problem, they need to be in the mode of continuous improvement. But to get to your question about how often is that happening, there certainly are still companies that, again, they don't necessarily want to be very open about that. But what I run into sometimes, and what I have ran into in my career, is almost a difference in a risk perspective. And people may, on one side, may say, well, look, this company took too many chances. I mean, Chernobyl is just sort of
Yeah.
a case study of that, as was Bhopal in India, a very serious accident that
Yeah.
occurred. Um, and you can say, well, this company took too many chances, but someone with a different risk appetite may say, no, no, we didn't take too many chances. It was just this one mistake, and there was absolutely no way that we could have predicted this particular situation.
Yeah.
And I mean, people are still sort of arguing to some extent on exactly what happened in some of these major accidents that we've investigated. But that's the one thing that I still see. And what, just to tell a very quick story. One time when I was with the Chemical Safety Board, we were investigating this accident,
Mhm.
and it just so happened that they had a small hole that had developed in a tank due to corrosion.
Uh-huh.
And an inspector had found that and had put on his report, you need to fix this as soon as possible. And when I was asking people about that in meetings, someone in one of the discussions said, in one of my interviews said, well, he didn't say go fix it now. And I'm like, okay, that's not something you should hang your hat on. That doesn't sound like that's a continuous improvement. So we really need to address something
Oh,
like that. That's what I've ran into
Wow.
sometimes. And it's
yeah.
especially bad in one of these big ones where, There's a lot of legalities involved. I have done interviews with several lawyers in the room from several different entities, people representing the company that designed the unit, or people representing the company that actually installed and constructed the unit, or and sometimes you have subcontractors involved. So you have a lot of dynamics at the same
Yeah.
time. So that's kind of what I see as far as, I wouldn't necessarily call it covering up, but I go into a little bit of how that happens in Hazardous Lies as well.
So a little misunderstanding could cause a big disaster, if I understood
Yes.
you right.
Yes.
Oh my God, so much factors must be handled through this.
Yeah, yeah.
People
That's
say,
incredible though, and incredible, isn't it? Is and Stuart, Stephen, sorry, I like the way that you risk appetite. That was the word that I picked up with that there, right? Risk appetite, and again, if you a gentleman in the UK, he's got a big oil and gas background. He's a gentleman called Tim Marsh.
Mm.
I don't know if you've heard of him.
I've heard of
But
the name, yes.
yeah, he's a very influential figure, right, within the safety space in the UK, and he often talks about risk literacy
Hmm.
about organisations, and yeah, so he's got a lot going on there, but yeah, he often uses that phrase a lot, we organisations, whether it's from the newest employee to the CEO, it really depends on but once you see something, you can't unsee it, right?
yeah,
Right.
yes,
Exactly.
And yeah,
yes.
that's where I'm trying to get into, dive into. But some corporate organizations, they see it, but they choose to ignore it for whatever reason, and we're seeing that in the oil and gas sector within the North Sea right now. It's happening, and it's also transferring into the renewable sector as well. So it's almost like a disease, using that word, and it's spreading, across organizations. But I like that word, that risk appetite. I like it.
Like a
And
cancer.
it's and Dan, an excellent perspective. And I mean, I've been on both sides of this. I was in the chemical industry when we've had accidents, so I understand that, it's not, and people try to attribute negative motives always to someone who's doing that. I always tried to tease that out. I always tried to think, okay, are we simply dealing with someone who was overly optimistic about how the process would respond? And for example, I was just to tell a quick story. When I was a consultant, I was doing a HAZOP, which is hazard and operability analysis in a refinery in the United States, large refinery. And we were talking about one of their distillation columns that they had, and they only had one pump on the bottom. And this was some of the heavy material that comes from the crude oil that you take out of the ground. And if this column filled all the way up, you're talking about a huge disaster. It's going to fall over, it's
Oh
going to
yeah.
cause chain reaction, all that. So I asked during the HAZOP, well, what happens if you have a problem with that pump? Because they had not at that point. And they said, and somebody said, oh, well, that's no problem. We would just realign some lines, and we would send the material out, and we can do that. And then we started talking through it, trying to tease this out. So they decided to try that. They decided to say, well, what if we had this pump that goes out, and we need to have to align the lines so that the material can evacuate from this column. And 8 days later, they came back in after trying to do that, and they said, we need some redundancy in our process. We have a single point of failure here, which can cause us a disaster. We
Yeah,
need more redundancy in the process.
yeah,
And again, to your point, Dan, I think this risk appetite, I like that risk literacy, understanding these consequences that can come. Um, if we design systems that are operating essentially on the edge, or we just don't put enough inherent safety in our designs, then we can have some disasters.
We should write it these words to the history with golden lines. And this, by the way, this little history, leads us to another question. So many safety pros says emergencies is not my scope. Somehow, health and safety professionals, which I used to talk, several of them, are frightened from emergencies. They don't want to deal with the emergency situations. What's your take? Should HSA lead emergency response or preparedness, or is that a systematic failure?
Oh, now you've got me on one of my soapboxes. First of all, spoiler alert, I absolutely feel that HSE professionals have a robust role in all aspects of emergency response. I mean, if we think about it in all aspects, obviously pre-emergency, that's what your safety program is for. We want to prevent emergencies. Your health, safety, environment people have to be involved in the design of operating units to make sure that the unit is designed in a way to both prevent emergencies, but also to be able to respond appropriately and mitigate emergencies.
Yeah.
Now, during an emergency itself, I think a health, safety, environment individual has a critical role. In fact, I have actually, as an HSE professional, been sitting in the incident command center, helping to advise on aspects during the emergency response itself. Because your responsibility to care for the people in the facility, that doesn't end. You don't hand that off simply because we have an emergency. Oh, well, let's sit back and then we'll try to, address these problems after we finish. HSE professionals have, in my opinion, a very critical, very robust role during the emergency itself and actually afterwards. And I'll tell you that when I was in the government, we had an accident at one of our national laboratories. And I was surprised because my boss had conducted the accident investigation afterwards, which is another thing in the mode of continuous learning. When you have one of these situations, you want to do an accident investigation and then correct whatever problems you had leading up to it. Because it's all about preventing them in the future. And I was so surprised that the team had not gone into aspects of the emergency response itself. They basically stopped their scope when the emergency started. And I remember we had a back and forth, and I remember putting my hands on the table because he made a comment, something like, our scope is only to look at the incident. And I said, but the response to an emergency, to an incident, is part of the incident. Because if you have a good response, then you can mitigate the problems. But if you have a bad response, and I saw this a lot in the safety board, if you have a bad response, you can really exacerbate the problems. I mean, for example, when I was in the safety board, I led the study into the hazards of nitrogen asphyxiation. So you may have ran into this in industry. As an example, nitrogen is used as an inert material in columns and in materials and reactors and things like that. But if someone is inside for whatever reason, when you have this burst of nitrogen that comes in, the person can asphyxiate. And what I found was that many of the fatalities from these accidents and these incidents involving asphyxiation were because people didn't understand that there was an existing, continuing, ongoing problem, and they would rush in to the reactor in order to look at or in order to save someone. Now that's a human desire. Yes, we do want to help people who are in distress, but at the same time, you have to have that situational awareness. The worst thing that an emergency responder can do during an emergency is become part of the problem. Right? And that's what I found during my study of the nitrogen asphyxiation. We looked at several accidents across the United States and what had happened in those accidents. And it's really a takeaway to say that the response is important. And it's very important that safety professionals have a very involved role in all aspects. I told you, I warned you. That's one of my soapboxes. I'm so glad we had this conversation. I
Very
could
good.
go
Yeah,
on and on and on, but I hope you just get my point. And I will just
yeah,
say emphatically, HSE professionals, your scope does not stop when the emergency starts. In fact, it should kick into gear, and you have an even more involved role with helping to help the people in your facility, and and the environment, and even the equipment. I mean, you have a unique perspective to assist during that time.
yeah, yeah,
Great.
yeah.
Good. Very good.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Absolutely
yeah.
brilliant.
It's funny because as you're talking through that, Steve, what I'm sort of visualizing now is the bow tie event. On the left side you have all the preventative measures, and on the right side, you have that's where it's all gone wrong, and that's what I'm visualizing now. And it's yeah, and we've got many situations here in the UK, especially in the farm agricultural sector, where slurry pits are used. And it was actually we had a situation in Northern Ireland, where a family was so three brothers were killed and one sister. But basically this chap went in. Their dog went into the slurry pit. So the eldest brother went down, and the second one and a third one followed. But the
Oh,
sister realised what was happening, what was
Yes.
happening. So she called the emergency services for the rescue plan, and obviously she lost her three brothers. But it
oh,
it it and it is that situational awareness, and it is having an understanding. And she was actually on an interview. This is going back a fair few years ago, and she was asked a question. What what did you feel at the time? And she said she just had a gut feeling that something wasn't right.
Ooh.
And
Dan,
yes,
I heard so many stories like that. One of it's always sad. Fatalities are always sad. I mean, uh, in the workplace, we always like it, and it's not just a slogan. We want people to go home in the same shape that they came to work.
yes.
But there was one incident at a reactor in one of the facilities that I investigated, and the problem was that it was a subcontractor, and apparently they had left a roll of duct tape between some of the trays that were in the reactor. And so we will never know exactly what was in the individual's mind, if they knew that it was inerted with nitrogen or not. But because of that roll of duct tape, not only that individual died because he went in to presumably get the duct tape out, two other individuals followed that individual. They both perished. And it's a tragedy. And that's a way, I mean, even getting back to storytelling, I mean, when I have told that story or actually presented it in that way, people can visualize it, people can see it. And it really makes people think about how important it is to know the hazards that you're dealing with, and if you have an ongoing situation.
yeah,
Good.
brilliant, brilliant.
Yes. When I'm training the professionals through the health, safety, and environment training, I'm doing very little math for them. And I'm saying, listen, how much emergency professionals you need to save one casualty? Three.
Hmm.
At least the three emergency professional needed to rescue one casualty. Okay?
Okay.
Three of them entering inside the emergency. So one of them is idiot. Don't have any situational awareness, don't have any self safety response, not responsibility at zero. And he's not wearing his PPA, he's not looking around, he's not taking the safety measurements, and he's also become a casualty by himself. So how much people now we need to save two casualties, at least six, right? Now in this situation we need at least six casualty professionals to save these two casualties. So one of them is that one idiot professional. Is not professional
Hmm.
at all after this, what he occurred to his team. So, right, at least one, this guy who become the casualty himself, the casualty which is already inside the emergency, and 6 team members are already under the danger. Their all lives become under the danger. So if we are wanting to save one life with 3 people, with the zero situation awareness, with the zero safety measurements, and with the zero steps taken to hold yourself all safety, the 6 members and 2 casualties put under the danger. So it's not the bad practice, the very bad practice.
Yes. Yes, and that's that goes back to it, and in the aftermath of something like that, I've been on a number of investigations to actually look at not only why did the individuals who perished trying to save that first individual, but how come the first individual wasn't properly equipped or wasn't properly trained? And we need to tease out what from our safety programs is causing us to have incidents and issues like that.
Yeah.
Hello, Susan.
Hello.
Hi. Am I muted or not?
No,
No, you're always welcome.
Okay, cool. All right. The one thing that I used to do OSHA inspections in public sectors, and what I found over and over again were no written procedures for confined space entry. They had some, but they were more sketches. The assumptions they made about potential if anything went wrong was they were going to call the fire department. Well, I'd go over to the fire department. They said, no, we're not going into space.
Yeah.
They didn't tell us that.
No way.
Exposure control plan had no plan in it. It had all the requirements, but there were no procedures for responding to a blood spill. Except for what was in the OSHA standard, which was don't get splashed. And that was pretty much their procedures. It's just found over and over again that a failure to plan for pretty much anything beyond what they are like held down by a standard to do, and even then they're not doing it.
Yeah, totally right. So we have only 5 minutes left to the end of our meeting. So maybe the last steps through the ending our podcast. So Stephen, the one key change you'd make in regulations, training, or cultures, whatever, one key change to stop the next big CBRN disaster or chemical disaster.
Yeah, I think one big change, if I could wave a magic wand, I think it would be just generally that organizations need to be in the mode of continuous improvement. And I don't mean that flippant. I actually mean that from the design and making inherent safety an absolute part of the process of design, I think you need to have robust ways of looking and a robust approach to both identifying and responding to hazards. As I mentioned earlier, there's some processes where we've made it as inherently safe as we could from the standpoint of the chemicals that we use or something, but we need redundancy and we need more notifications so that people can understand the situational awareness that they're in. I think that also, I think an important aspect is, and I think we heard, I think Susan had a great perspective on the issue about procedures that are either not as detailed or specific as what they need to be, but it's not just enough to have things on paper. You really need to have, compliance is one thing. Compliance should be your floor. If you have OSHA or the equivalent of OSHA in, wherever you are, you don't just necessarily want to barely meet the minimum. You want to be in continuous improvement. You want to go back and look at the design of your operation. You want to go back and have a good management of change systems such that, like I said before, you don't have this incremental series of small changes that put you in a very different risk envelope than you would be otherwise. And so, and it's not just looking at a management of change. And I've seen this in my career over and over. And it's something that's another soapbox I could get off, but I know we don't have time for that.
Yep.
But you don't just look at each change individually in isolation. If a process changes, you need to look at that holistically. And where is our process now? Our situational awareness. We're in a much different situation now than we were before. For example, when the price of material goes up, we want to increase our throughput so we can get more output, so we can make more money. And but we can't prioritize profits over safety. Safety has to go along with our operations and our profits. Otherwise, if we push too hard, and if we do have accidents like this, then all of a sudden we're talking about significant problems that we can, that can cost us a whole lot more than if we had been in continuous improvement mode and designed it right. I remember one time I investigated an accident where they were actually moving a drum of material, but it had been in the warehouse for some time. And they weren't even sure, it had been there so long, they weren't even sure what was in the drum.
Yeah.
But unbeknownst to them at the time, there had been shock sensitive peroxides that had developed. So when the operator actually just started to turn the drum to roll it out of the warehouse, it exploded.
Oh my God.
And fortunately, that was a near miss or near hit, however you define it, because a piece of the shrapnel came up and clipped the individual's ear. But you could have easily, if that had gone into his heart or that had gone into his throat, you could have easily had a fatality at that point. And so it's really important to understand, what your situational awareness is. But what I was getting to with the cost benefit and the case for safety was that to actually clean it up at the beginning, when the material was first identified, would have cost them something like $11,000.
Oh.
They were, after they had to shut down operations, when you look at all the direct and indirect cost, they were in the hundreds of thousands of dollars simply because they didn't take care of the material back when it would have been a lot cheaper to do so. And it's the same thing with design. It's easier to change your design, build in redundancy, and have a safe process while it's still on paper before you put it in the field. But after it's in the field, you still need to go back and look at that and see. So that's, I guess, if you were to say one thing, I think I would probably put that in a cultural aspect of always feeling you can do better. Because if you don't necessarily have an absolute standard of safety, I mean, if you ask me, is this plant safe? Is this plant safe? Well, it's hard to answer that question, but I want to answer the question, is it safer than it was before? Because we're always marching toward continuous improvement. So that would be one thing I would say.
Perfect, I say. Miss Susan, are you with us? Miss Susan, we are going to upload our podcast to YouTube. So you will be appear in our this episode. Are you agree to be with us?
Yeah, sure.
On YouTube. There's no problem for you?
No.
All right. Thank you so much for attending today.